Hey guys, what's up? Ooh, I think my microphone is a little bit loud. There we go. Hey, how you doing? So we are now 250 years into America. Congratulations to all Americans for your country existing for a quarter millennia and inflicting itself on the world. I wanted to talk a little bit about what America has given us in terms of cultural output, influence in the world, because really it is the most influential country in world history. Like it beats the British out by a massive margin. Because if you think about the British, like yes, the British colonized all of these, like a massive landmass. Like I think it was 30% of the world in terms of, or 25% of the world in terms of landmass, 30% of the world in terms of population. But actually they didn't really set that deep roots into these countries in terms of cultural influence. Like they did have some effect, but most of the westernization that has occurred since the end of World War II, the American I guess you could call it the American moment, the American era. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. But of course, since this is a live stream, it's going to be pretty general, I'm going to sort of weave in and out and probably ramble and lose my train of thought like I usually do. Let me check the live chat real quick. And D flat got heartbroken again. Brakpilled again. Yeah. Well, at least you've gotten to the point where you can be heartbroken. I don't think I've interacted with a void for like a decade now. outside of formal interactions. It's probably like the worst country on earth. Now, look, I'm not going to get into a whinge about Canada because nobody actually cares about Canada except for other Canadians, right? Other than to laugh at us. But, this is probably one of the most antisocial countries on the planet, maybe with the exception of some East Asian countries, for sure. Yeah, I'm secretly a Chad this whole time. And America is at the point of collapse. Those other Western countries like Europe has a bit more time than Americans. I couldn't even live in Canada with the jets. Well, to be honest with you, I don't think America is going to collapse. And that's not to say that I wouldn't like that to happen. Unfortunately, I think we're going to be stuck with this civilization for an extended period of time. Probably at least a century from now, perhaps longer. That doesn't mean that it's going to be in the same form that it is now. Like, I think it hit its apogee in the period between the 90s and Trump's election. And it's been declining in terms of global influence since then. But it's going to be a very long, slow decline. Because unlike, for example, Russia or China, America is like a giant island. Right? It exists with oceans on both sides. It has two pathetic, defenseless countries that border it that pose no threat to it whatsoever. So America, this is actually a superpower because America can allow any kind of misery and dysfunction and rot throughout its domestic population, and it doesn't have to worry about the domestic population because there's no capacity for any other country to pose a real threat to it. Like, no other country can invade America, So they're in kind of a unique situation where you see this gradual and growing separation between the formal, I guess you could call it the elite economy of America, which would be like the real economic powerhouse of America is financial and in tech. And these two sectors of the American economy, you're seeing it gradually separate from the American nation itself, because the international financial and tech centers in America have access to the global labor force, right? Or they're pushing aggressively towards that. Trump has pushed back on that somewhat, but it's not going to last, and it's certainly not going to last when he's out of office. Whether it's Democrats or Republicans in after them, they're going to appease the business and tech lobby. So they don't need to really worry about the domestic American economy, or the domestic American population, I should say. Because if you think about it, nationalism and national growth and development, it's actually very inefficient from the point of view of an economist. All right, if you think about it, you have two choices. You could either have a domestic growing population that you then have to invest. You have to gear the economy around creating families and raising them. And in addition to that, you then have to invest enormous resources into educating this domestic population so that they are fit for employment in the economy. Why would you do that when you have access to freshly grown and educated adults throughout the rest of the world? And they all want to come here because this is the wealthiest country on earth, particularly for its upper classes, right? They can just mass import the entire globe's talented tenth or their cognitive elite. And in addition to that, if you're a real elite in these countries, the rest of the world, if you're some kind of politically corrected, politically connected, corrupt elite family in like an African or Middle Eastern or South Asian, East Asian, whatever, any country, you can park your money in America, and it will be much more safe than anything that you could have back home. Like there's these massive incentives for America to remain this global sucking force, sucking all this wealth and also this talent throughout the rest of the world. And it makes the domestic American population basically access to requirements for the most part. Not entirely, obviously. Like the ones that are really like the top 0.1%, they're able to squeeze through. But most of the population, like the bottom 95%, they're kind of access to requirements for the most part. And this is actually, I think, what's going to be the challenging force for American politics going forward. I think this is going to be the last hurrah of the right in America. Like this Trump election, the alt-right in America, I think this is cooked once Trump is out of office. It's not coming back. I think whites as a demographic group, like what you see with the elites in America, is I think they perceive the white population as a threat that is going to be perpetually on the decrease or perpetually declining from this point onwards. And if they can just ride the wave of current turbulence in American politics, they know that every election, the white population is going to be a smaller and smaller percent of the electorate. And eventually they're going to reach a point where, because they're already divided as an ethnic group, well, they're not even really an ethnic group. They're multiple overlapping ethnic groups, right? There's not just a single white American ethnic group. But they're already going to have political division within themselves. And by the time that, probably by around 2032, I would say, at most, maybe even earlier than that, the white population is not going to be politically determinative of elections anymore. You won't have to depend on them to win elections anymore. Like we've already seen this in Canada, right? We're already seeing immigrant-dominated districts in Canada. There was a recent election in Ontario where an MP who was actually endorsed by the Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, he actually lost the election to, and he was a Liberal as well, he lost the election to another contender who was a Bangladeshi immigrant on a student visa from the 2000s. And the reason why he lost is because the Bangladeshi immigrant marketed himself politically as Bangladeshi in a Bangladeshi-dominated district, which is what this guy was running in. And he was like the typical libtard. He was doing all the libtard stuff. Like he was checking all the boxes. And he still lost. Because when these people become the dominant ethnic group in a district, they're going to vote for their own people. And that's, at that point then, that's when you're going to see instability. I don't know if America will... It's hard to say. It's hard to say if America... Because America has this weird way of like... It assimilates populations, but... It's very powerful at assimilating populations, but it assimilates them into like... It like drags every culture and ethnicity down into like a degenerate mass. It like degenerates them into... Like I can't think of a single group... Like... Here's a thought process or a thought experiment, okay? Can you think of a single ethnic group, race, culture, whatever, that has existed in America for multiple generations and that is morally and ethically improved compared to the initial arrivals, the first generation? I don't think there's a single group you could point to, including white populations as well, by the way. I don't think there's a single group you could point to. Pretty much every group degenerates due to existing within America, and they sort of become part of the biomass. That's what it seems like, at least from the outside. 2008 is when the real economy collapsed. Since then, wages haven't been enough to raise a family or buy property. Yeah, but again, it's kind of like, who cares? Like, these people don't care. Like, the mega rich have never lived better than what they're currently, the current lifestyle that they have now. This was actually, Keith Woods has kind of become really boring lately. But, he used to make some really good videos, and he did make a video about this, how trying to appeal to the elites in some way is just a self-defeating process, or a self-defeating strategy, because the elites in the American system, the real billionaires, like the truly wealthy, have never had it better than what they're currently experiencing now. Like, they can travel across the planet. Their assets have never been more valuable. They've never had more power and wealth relative to the rest of the world than at any point before this. And because of the nature of the American elite class, like, all that matters with America, like, America doesn't really have, it's like a black hole of identity, right? Like, all you really need, like, to be an American in good standing is to be financially successful, economically successful, and not a criminal. And you're considered an American in good standing culturally. And because of that, they can assimilate any billionaire or elite class from anywhere around the world into their elite. And so it's very porous and open in that regard. So, like, how do you appeal? Like, what can you offer a billionaire family, let's say, that would make them want to support anything that would be more nationalistic or right-wing or economically protectionist, let's say? Like, there's nothing that you could offer them that would allow that. Canadians and English are degenerates as well. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm not denying that by any stretch. I mean, America is not, it's not like Americans are suddenly transformed into these wicked people or whatever overnight. This was the logical conclusion of the English Enlightenment as it manifested in America, right? Because America was the most cutting-edge liberal Enlightenment state. The British Empire still had the monarchy, it still had the aristocracy. The Americans abolished all that. And they just created a liberal republic that was, like, the basis of the American system is just enforcing contracts. Like, the legal basis of the American system. So, naturally, when your legal system is fundamentally that and nothing else, you inevitably end up with all culture and all other aspects of the society just degenerating into that. Like, everything just becomes a transaction. And identity is formed on the basis of resources, right? And you're saying Chinese. I would not say the Chinese are better in second or later generations than the first generation. First of all, a lot of them end up mixing out of existence, right? Like, the main reason why Chinese, Japanese, Korean Americans still exist as a group is because they're constantly replenishing their numbers through bringing people in from the home country, whether it's women as wives or it's also just further economic migrants coming in. If we cut off Asian immigration to America tomorrow, the Asian American population would just dissolve within a few generations, and it would just become like what the Native Americans are now. They're like 90% white genetically, but they pretend they're Americans. That's what would happen to them. Elon Musk is a trillionaire, but he still can't buy Grimes' love back, and he also still can't have Hassan unscrew son Vivian. That's true. Yeah, money can't buy everything. That's true. But is that something that you could offer the billionaire class? You could say, like, oh, well, we're going to support traditional values that makes women more socially conservative and more... But you can't change female nature, though. Right? Like women, it's not like women are biologically or functionally, well, they are functionally different, but they're not structurally, psychologically different from previous generations. Like the women that are behaving the way that we know and love now, that potential was always in that population. Going back to the earliest, the most trad times ever. And as a matter of fact, there was this book I was reading about the emergence of the welfare state in France in the 19th century. And when you read about what Western European countries are like, or were like, before the 19th century, they actually sound remarkably similar to what a lot of Latin American countries are now, where you do have like a functioning, socially functioning middle and upper class with relatively conservative social norms and behaviors. But then you also had a huge underclass of criminals when it comes to men and prostitutes when it comes to women. It was criminals and prostitutes. And they were this massive, like virulent underclass in France. There was all these abandoned children, and they would end up just becoming orphans and urchins in the streets. And the welfare state in France came after the French Revolution, and it was designed to deal with this structurally. Basically, the state intervened in the situation to try and stabilize these lower classes and decrease the illegitimate births, try to reduce prostitution, and by extension reduce criminality. Like state, they had like wards of the state that developed, and this is actually why Western European countries slowly lost that element, whereas Latin American countries didn't go through that. They maintained that element of this large underclass of degenerates, basically, that never were dealt with properly. Right. Sleeping with black women, I highly recommend. I mean, I don't interact with them enough to be able to recommend that, but you know, if that's your thing, then congratulations. I'm glad to hear that it's working out for you. I will say this: we do have Africans around here, but they're like black. They're like real Africans, right? And what I've noticed with black women is that when they're thin and they're fit, they probably have like the best body genetics of any group of women in the world. Like they tend to have the best figures, and they have the best muscle insertions for toning. But the big bottleneck when it comes to black women is the face card. Their faces are the most likely area where they're going to be fucked up. If they have a good face card, they usually can come out really nice. And I have seen a few cases of that. But most of the time, when I see a black chick and it ends up, you know, it's not going to work, it's almost always because of the face. Almost always. That's the big bottleneck for black women. You got to give credit where it's due. The elite portion of the Levant tribe had leveled up through Babylon, New York of Mesopotamia, Persia, religious Macedonia. Yeah, I mean, well, actually, it is interesting. When the exile happens to Babylon, the Israelites lost their agricultural class. The agricultural class stayed in Israel, and it was the elites, the scribes and merchants that were deported to Babylon and stayed in Babylon. And then once they ended up going back to Babylon after the exile was ended by, I believe it was Cyrus, when they arrived, they perceived the farmers that had stayed in Israel and also the Samaritans that had stayed in Israel, who were a related but distinct subgroup of Hebrews. They perceived them as being racially mixed and racially tainted. Like, this is actually the impression you get when you read their scribes. And they also developed a very strong aversion to anything involving like working on the land, anything like that. It's quite interesting. This is something that, again, one of the most important books that has ever been written on them is Separation and Its Discontents by Kevin MacDonald. because he goes through the entire history and he talks all about them in that regard. Like whenever I talk about them and I'm referring to like a specific historical circumstance that shaped their culture, most likely I'm getting it from Kevin McDonald. No wonder Julius and I are successful and this guy is a complete loser. He is bitter low IQ liar. Salty that he is genetically inferior. He doesn't have a career and copes with Latin America. Yes, I do. Matter of fact. I don't know, Tails, why don't you invite me onto a stream and we can have a debate? I'd really enjoy that. Let me scroll up a little bit. You see the Chinese robotics company is going to release a hyper-realistic humanoid robot companion later this year. Exactly. I knew that was coming. Where it's going to come is from East Asia, because they don't have the same negative associations with artificial companions, we'll put it that way. They don't have the same negative association. And as a consequence, they... well, I mean, I laid it out in the video that I made, right? Like, I think that the natural consequence is going to be China will resolve its demographic problem through integrating AI companions that are centrally controlled, right? Okay, Sister Wolf on Discord. All right, cool. I'm down with that. Hang on just 1 second. I'm going to... Sir Wolf. I'm not getting anything here. Hang on. Add friend. There we go. I sent a friend request to you. All right, we can chit-chat. Same with black guys, weak face card. I don't know. It seems to me that black guys have, like, they don't seem to have the same negative as black women when it comes to face. At least that's been my experience, just looking at them and looking at how women treat them versus how men generally interact with black women. He never misses a stream. He really doesn't. Like, Tails, and the funny thing is, like, Tails and I would go back and forth regularly on things. And at least in terms of private interactions, he was usually a lot more cordial than in public interactions. And I know for a fact that he has taken ideas from me and integrated them into his thinking. So even if he greatly dislikes my point of view when it comes to women and when it comes to the race issue, like, you cannot deny that I have ideas that are valid because you have used them yourself. And by the way, when it comes to economics, I mean, that's one of the main issues. I talk about this. Men, and as a matter of fact, I've now known several guys who have, they're actually seniors in software. They've been laid off. And the economy in software is getting very difficult because of these innovations with AI combined with mass migration and outsourcing, right? So, like, pretending that you can just career max in 2026, like, what would you even recommend somebody do? Like, software is a terrible idea right now. And physical engineering, I would say physical engineering, there's more of a job security to it, but it still is very scarce in terms and competitive right now in terms of getting internships. And then in addition to that, there's engineers around the world. There's engineers around the world that want access to our incomes. And why wouldn't they? If I was from a country with a per capita income of like $7,000 to $10,000 a year, maybe an engineer would make 5 times that, like $50,000 a year at most. Like we're talking senior engineer. Well, they could move to the United States and make 5 times that, $250K a year. They could move to Canada and they would make maybe 3 times that. Well, how are you going to compete if you're born and raised here? Well, our economies are now designed. They're oriented around increasingly disenfranchising the local population in favor of imported people from the rest of the world because it's more efficient. Because they're already homegrown, they're fully grown, they don't have loans, or they can abandon their loans in their countries of origin, and they can just migrate here. No debt, they have the education, they have the years of experience, they can outcompete us in the economy, in our own economy. And we have no way to counteract that because the left wants to bring them in for ideological reasons, right? Because they want to dilute the population and destroy any majority population, right? So, yeah. And which idea? I've talked about my demographics ideas, my concept of the demographic pyramid, population pyramid, creating excess male population on the younger men, or excess competition for younger men for younger women. And you have acknowledged that as a valid concept, right? Yeah, be a trade cuck. That's exactly... I mean, trades... You can make money if you're in the trades and you have the intelligence, but the problem is that trades are also heavily gatekept. Here's the issue, because I know this because my family came from... Like, my dad was an electrician. He owned his own business. And when it comes to economic downturns, there's no reason for the tradesmen to apprentice somebody and make them a journeyman when they would then compete with them in the currently struggling economy. Like, why would they do that? It's a direct disincentive to them, right? AI is all hype and has cost no jobs. That's literally not true. Like, I can actually ping you. If you want to jump in my server at some point later, I can ping you at least 4 guys who have either directly lost their jobs due to AI arbitrage or have a first-degree relative that has lost their job. And we're not talking about junior devs that are just like being code monkeys. We're talking seniors. It's actually pretty bad. It's pretty bad. And just pretending that it's not an issue is why you won't get anyone paying attention to you. Because your reality is not agreeing with their reality. Right? And we are going to attention economy to trust economy given AI automation, human need for authenticity. 100%. There's a guy, Can You See Me Now, who made that point a long time ago. And it's funny because he used to say like he doesn't think he's very intelligent, but that was actually a very intelligent point to make, is that really the main driver of economy at this point is authenticity. Like, you can't get that from an AI. And to some extent, there's certain jobs, and ironically, these are going to be jobs that are more female-oriented, because women prefer interacting more than men do. Men are much more efficient and practical when it comes to social interaction. Women tend to be more oriented towards socially interacting for the sake of it. And also, and this is just a fact, when it just comes to socializing for the sake of it, both men and women prefer to interact with women over men. They find women to be more pleasant to interact with. And to be honest with you, I mean, I'm the same way. Like, if I have to, okay, obviously I don't want to interact with a woman who looks at me like, I'm a piece of dog shit that she scraped off her boot, right? But if we're talking about just the same level of respect, women are just, I think it's because there's an absence of threat from women that exists with men. And as a result, it's just more pleasant and neutral to interact with a woman in just a given social situation than a man, especially if she's young and attractive. And as a consequence, the attention economy is going to be disproportionately competitive with them. And as a matter of fact, the VTuber industry is a direct example of this. Like, and it's crazy to even think about this, because, you know, I don't know if it's an age thing, but it kind of reminds me of, you know those earplugs, these suction cup earplugs that we use now just as a standard norm. You stick them in your ear and they like suction into your ear. I remember when those first came out, I thought to myself, there's no way this form of headphone is going to become attractive. It's going to take off, because it felt so weird going in your ear. I remember thinking that to myself, like, there's no way this is going to become a major shift in how they design headphones. I was dead wrong. It became a major shift. And VTubers, if I was just proposed this by somebody, that like girls would use these anime avatars and just voice act these anime avatars without even being physically without their physical appearance even being seen, I would have said there's no way this would catch on. Like, it's because it's ridiculous, right? Like, the reason why girls get parasocial connections with simps is because they're attracted to their physical appearance, right? There's no way that this is going to take off as a huge thing just because they're anime characters that anybody could design. You have no idea what this void looks like. Like, why would you simp for this? I would have been dead wrong, because VTubers, it's an enormous industry, right? There's a lot of women making a living off of not even being like a physical person, but just an animated character. They don't even need to reveal who they really are, what they really look like. It's insane. And AI hype is gone for good. If you invest in AI 2026, you're literally a boomer. You know, you're not understanding. Okay. In 2000, when the dot-com bubble crashed, there was a disastrous collapse in the investments made into the internet, because there was a massive amount of malinvestment. I mean, I was reading one time, I was reading articles from like 1997 to 1999. And it was crazy. Like, if you created a website in 1998 or 1999 that was just like it was like a white papers book for internet, like for emails. Like, it could be just like an email list. You would get $1 million dumped into your account by some stupid investor. Like, it was absurd, the kind of money that people were making just whipping up stupid HTML websites. Okay. Now, obviously, the vast majority of those, there's no real productive value there, right? So inevitably, when the chickens came home to roost and the investors were looking for their return on investment, and most of the projects that came out of the dot-com bubble were just washouts, they were just bad investments, it caused a huge collapse, and the vast majority of the internet companies that were created during the dot-com bubble collapsed. Not all of them did. Microsoft, Apple, Google, I don't think what else. Like the major ones. Yahoo survived. IBM, of course, but IBM has been around even before the dot-com bubble. But like the major internet era giants survived. But the point is, yes, the bubble grew and then the bubble popped. But the innovations, the fundamental innovations that the internet allowed for, remained after the fact. And what were those innovations? The innovations were when you, before the internet, all right, let's say that you're a business and you want to hire an employee. Before the internet, you would have to put advertisements in all the local newspapers and whatever. You could maybe get like a 50-kilometer radius if you put the money in on your investments. Maybe a 50-kilometer radius. After the internet, you had access to the entire country, right? You put job applications online, and anybody from around the country and even outside the country can now apply to those jobs. And as a result, this massively increased the efficiency of hiring. And in a way, it was very similar to what happened with the dating market. And by the way, guys, I made a video on this all the way back in, I think it was late 2021 or early 2022. I made a video talking about this, where online dating had a very similar impact to the efficiency of matching in relationships that online job application portals did for businesses hiring. Because when you could only operate, if you're a woman before online dating, you could only operate within the parameters of, like, within the area that you lived in and the men that you interacted with regularly. And you basically just had to pick from the men that were physically present around you. At best, maybe you could put an advertisement in a newspaper saying, in the personal section, saying, these are my stats, looking for a date, please call me at this number. Like, at best, you could do that. For the most part, 90% of the time, you would be finding a relationship through your friendship circle, through people that you interacted with regularly, and that's a very inefficient way of doing it. So if you're like an 8 out of 10 foot, and you are in a town of like 10,000 people, let's say, okay, probably out of that town of 10,000 people, just due to the options, the limited options that you have, you're probably going to date down in terms of looks just to find somebody, all right? Whereas if you're an 8 out of 10 and you're in a town of 10,000 people, you can expand the radius of your dating app to maybe 200 kilometers. And that could encompass several cities around you. And now you have access to all the most attractive men in all these cities. And it's the exact same process that happened with job applications, all right? And as a result, a lot of guys who, before the internet era, would have gotten in without being the most optimized candidate, just because there was only a limited selection of options that employers had to go for. Those guys are now bypassed in the internet era because employers now have like thousands of potential candidates that are applying from across the entire country that they can choose from. So it's much more efficient, much more efficient. And you're seeing the exact same thing with AI. Yes, there is massive overinvestment in AI. Massive overinvestment in pointless shit. Like, we've seen all of the really, like, okay, there have been some gems that have come out of AI memes. So we have to give them that. But for the most part, investments in AI have been malinvestments. They haven't actually, generating funny videos of goofy things is not a productive use of AI, okay, in terms of economic efficiency. And these are the things that will crash and burn when the AI bubble pops. The bottom line is, though, is that you can massively reduce the workload in your multiple industries, several industries, not just tech. You can, like, I remember there was a friend of mine who had this idea about creating rubber ducky toys but they're based on like ancient animals from the Cretaceous period or whatever. So it'd be like dinosaurs and plesiosaurs and whatever. And he generated this this hypothetical advertisement, that, like a poster that you might see on a wall somewhere of, like, if he was to create these and sell them, this is what the advertisement would look like. And it looked professional. It was 100% AI generated, single prompt, very professional looking. And you could say that, yeah, but they're using, say, ChatGPT right now, and it's currently very cheap or even free, but once the AI bubble pops, they're going to jack those prices up. And I could say, yes, you're probably correct, but even if this were to cost $50, it would still be worth more than having to hire an advertising team to create it for you, right? Like the amount of efficiency that AI generation allows for in various parts of the economy, even if you increase the price point quite a bit for those services, they're still more efficient than using a traditional illustrator, traditional animator, or traditional advertising advertising company, whatever. And that's what's important. Like right now, the big issue is that AI investment is so intense and so huge that they're trying to figure out ways to monetize it outside of these specific niches. Because these specific niches, even though they themselves are individually profitable, they don't generate enough profit to justify the massive investment that was poured in. Like they cannot generate a profit that allows for the investment poured into it to be considered a return on investment. That's the main issue now. That's going to go under. That's going to nosedive. The actual technology itself is going to dramatically change things the exact same way the internet changed things. All right? And if people don't think that, you have to look at how people are using AI right now. We have not even begun to maximize the human side or optimize the human side of efficient use of AI. We've only had the AI itself being optimized to be as efficient as possible and optimized to be as like maxing out its capabilities to the extent that we can. We have not seen the human side optimized yet. Once humans get optimized for this, like the same way that the software engineering industry allowed for code and software development to be optimized over the decades after the rise of the internet era and the computing era, we are going to see these technologies be extremely transformative. Extremely transformative. And it's delusional to think otherwise. The state I live in, rent goes up every 6 months because the property taxes keep going up. Well, you know that there's the Republicans are trying to exempt property taxes for retirees. So don't worry. Property taxes won't be going up for everybody. I've been ugly and attractive, so I know what it's like. I still hate being around men more. If you're ugly, they punch down, and if you're attractive, they try and take you down. I do kind of find that. I would say it depends. There is definitely a difference between millennials and Zoomers in this regard. Millennials, I find, they're more like all-around degenerate. They don't really care. Like, looks maxing is kind of irrelevant to older millennials. Like, they never really had to do it, and so the concept is kind of alien to them. So they're kind of like the second iteration of the hippies in that regard, where they're just like left-wing economics. We need free healthcare and free shit, but we're also degenerates because like I've never met an older millennial incel. Like they've always had some sordid sexual history, like, and it's usually pretty degenerate sexual history. Younger millennials, they're more like Zoomers, and it's almost like a continuum. You go from older millennials and then transitioning into Zoomers. Younger millennials are kind of on that transition point. We're like a transitional fossil. Yes, I'm afraid so, Lone Hiker. Well, I'm sure you've seen what I'm talking about, right? Like, I know a lot of guys. I know a lot of... Okay, fair. Look, I'm not talking about every single individual. I'm talking about the community, right? The collective. And I know my older cousins, for example. I have some cousins that are 7 to 12 years older than me. And they never had problems with women. They had problems being broke. They had problems with their parents, let's say. But they never had problems with women. Now, granted, they were not ugly, okay? I would say that they weren't like Chads either. They were just sort of average looking. But, no, generally speaking, they were, my one cousin had several girlfriends. He ended up becoming a high school teacher, and he's married to a woman, and they just had 2 daughters, I think. And he's in his 40s now. And I remember even, like, he was living in an apartment with like 3 other people, and he would have girlfriends picking him up and taking him places. And again, he wasn't a Chad. All right, I would say he was like a 6 out of 10 in the aggregate. But yeah, dude, it was a different environment in the 2000s. It's a very different environment. Doesn't mean that if you didn't fit the neurotypical profile or the looks profile, you would still have to, you couldn't be a subhuman in terms of your looks, and you couldn't be non-neurotypical. Okay, but the MySpace era, the MSN chat room era, that period of time, for a brief period of time, was a really good time to be a young man. Because Zoomerfoids, it was like the second version of the boomers, because the boomers, the Zoomers millennials are the offspring of boomers, and boomers had about replacement fertility. Okay, Gen X is a much smaller generation than boomers, and the Zoomers are for the most part the offspring of younger boomers and Gen Xers. And as a result, you actually see a sort of double donut shape when it comes to population pyramids, where you have a big bulge of boomers and then a big bulge of Zoomers. And as you guys know, like, my theory when it comes to population pyramids is when you have a bottom-heavy population pyramid, if it's an actual pyramid shape, each cohort is larger in absolute size than the cohort that came before it. So as a result, because men and women, the age gap is a couple years, and women overwhelmingly prefer men older than them, at least by a couple years, or within a couple years. You combine this with a triangle-shaped population pyramid, you're going to have relatively little competition for women in the younger age brackets. When you have an inverted population pyramid, you have the exact opposite problem, where you have a cascading pileup of men competing for fewer and fewer women that are interested in their age bracket. Okay. Now, in the case of millennials, the younger millennials, they were like a second triangle-shaped population bulge. And so there was a period of time, I would say between 2000 and 2010, when I wouldn't say dating was like amazing, but it was better than it was for Gen X, and it was also better than it was for younger millennials and for Zoomers. And if you talk to millennials who were young around that age range, so 2000 to 2010, millennials that were born in like 85 to 90, I would say, like that, or 82 to 90, let's say, like that age range. Those guys, you don't see problems with dating in their age bracket. Like, you don't see guys that are like, I'm over 20 and I'm an incel. You don't see that. Or I'm a virgin and I'm over 20. Very rare. Most of the time, they were pretty degenerate. They would have like a lot of relationships and a lot of one-night stands. Like, older millennial women were pretty loose. They weren't as promiscuous as boomer women. Boomer women were the most promiscuous generation. Millennials are probably number 2. Like older millennials. And they become less promiscuous as time goes on. And actually, I think, and this is an opinion I have that's sort of counter to most BPers. I actually think that promiscuity, when you see an increase in real promiscuity in women, that actually is a sign that the dating market is more male favored. Because when men are in the choosing position relative to women, you tend to see women engage in more male pattern sexual behavior, because, like, even though the woman's strategy is to secure the highest status, most attractive man she can exclusively, if there's tight competition for men, they're willing to be more sexually loose to try and catch a guy by appealing to his sexual desires. Because actually, traditionalism or sexual conservatism is not just something that men want instinctively. Like, if you see what the boomers did, the boomers were the first generation that had a huge advantage when it came to women versus men. And this was even talked about in the 60s. I referenced it in one of my videos. Boomers, like boomer women actually experienced a marriage squeeze where there was not enough marriageable men in the age range that the boomer women wanted to marry for the number of women who wanted to get married. And what did boomer men do? This was the onset of the sexual revolution, because when women are in abundance, like, you have to think about how we think about it, okay? Like, the reason why we are instinctively sexually conservative and anxious about a woman's sexual past is because we are in an environment where women are very scarce. We are, as the red pillars would say, we're in a scarcity mindset, which is a reflection of reality. It's not like there's something wrong with it. It's a reflection of reality. Boomers, when they grew up, were in a abundance mentality because they lived in an abundance reality. Like, because there were all these options of women, they would prefer to have less strictly fixed exclusive relationships because men tend to prefer variety on average compared to women. All right. And I think you saw an increase in promiscuity among millennials relative to Gen X because of that as well. And then with Zoomers, it's going the other direction because Zoomers are, once again, faced with the female scarcity. So men are going to prefer sexual conservatism as a defensive strategy or a protective strategy because women are scarce. And women themselves do not, like, promiscuity does not benefit women, right? Promiscuity, it exposes that, well, think about it biologically, right? Because you have to assume, if we're thinking evolutionarily, we can't involve birth control and contraception, right? Women can get potentially exposed to diseases because women can acquire STDs much more easily than men can. Women can end up with an unintended pregnancy that there's no investment in because the man was not committed, and it's a massive burden on her, potentially a life-altering burden, right? So a woman's sexual strategy should be, in an evolutionary environment, she wants the highest status, most valuable man she can get, and she wants to lock him down as exclusively as possible. She wants to deny access to this man for other women, but she wants the most attractive man she can possibly get. So when women are in the strong position in terms of setting the tone for sex relations between men and women, this is where hypergamy, as we describe it, becomes the norm. Where, it's not like women just want to sleep around with a bunch of men. Like a bunch of men of varying levels of attractiveness. Like, if you think about a man, like, let's say that you're a man and you're in like a country where there's 2 times as many available women as men. Like, the typical man is obviously they're probably going to prefer the most attractive women they can find, but they're going to be quite happy to sleep with women ranging in attractiveness from like attractive to very attractive, right? Like, men are going to be much more loose with their preferences in terms of women, but women don't do that, right? So you end up with a very different tone to the culture when women are in the strong seat versus men, for sure. Thing is, we're in Darwin mode. We adapt or die. 100%. 100%. 100%. How much money do you think you would do for a vid on Black American African demographic pillar topics about them? I was thinking about it because I had a conversation with somebody else about they wanted me to do a video on something different. And I'd said I'd be willing to do a video probably for like $30 on a specific topic. I think that would be acceptable for me. And actually, I was thinking of doing something on blacks, but the problem is that it's kind of difficult because I'm coming at it from such an outsider perspective, right? Like Black Americans and like the relationship between Black Americans and white Americans. Like I have strong opinions on it, but my opinions are very much from the outside looking in, right? And I've had pushback on both sides from blacks and whites in the U.S. that have said, well, I understand what you're saying, but I think that it's more nuanced than that, you know? So I try to be careful about opining too much on things that I don't have personal experience in. But I would do one of my like very data-driven videos, because you know how the videos that I do, they tend to be very data-driven. Like I tend to try and do research citation statistics. And the first time that I did a video touching on black issues, it was actually the first video I made in my comeback, where I talked about nationalist women and the friend enemy distinction, because yes, black women, it is kind of a bizarre, rather unique phenomenon where they are much more aggressive in gatekeeping blackness in terms of mixed race people than black men are, right? Where you'll see a lot more black women try and make a distinction between being mixed and being 100% black, whereas black men are far less concerned with that. And of course, we all know why. It's because the vast majority of the time, when there's a mixed race person who's half black, half white, it's going to be black man, white woman, right? And I can't think of any other group that's really like this. Well, I mean, you could make the same argument that, like, you see the same imbalance with white men and Asian women versus Asian men and white women, but white women don't seem to be particularly concerned about that at all, right? Because I think white women are in a very strong sexual selection position, where really, I mean, the kind of men that end up with women of other races, like, they're usually not men that these women are that interested in anyways, right? Whereas with black men, it's often the opposite. Like, if a black man gets with a white woman, or even like just a non-black woman, Hispanic woman, typically he's going to be better in terms of his stats than the median black guy, right? Whereas in terms of attractiveness, white men that get with other races of women, it's just like, usually at best they're not any different in terms of attractiveness than the median white guy. Like, they're not more attractive than the typical white guy most of the time. And oftentimes they're less attractive, right? I mean, it's kind of hard to quantify it, but that tends to be the case. And it's funny because Tails was sort of using that as an attack. He's like, oh, you can't get a white woman. I'm like, yes, you're right. I can't. 100% you're right. I agree with you. Like, I'm not even offended by that, because it's a statement of reality. You know, my concern is, like, how do I get to somewhere in my life where I feel personally satisfied with the direction of things? I know that's not going to happen in Canada. Okay. I know that's not going to happen with a woman of my own background, because, okay, it's not really. It would be untruthful of me to say that I could not get any woman of my own background, but particularly in my age range now, the kind of women that I would be getting are basically women that are looking to, like, pop out a kid after they've tried all their options and nothing worked out. Like, I would be the backup option, basically, and I just find that an unacceptable outcome, right? So in that regard, then yes, but I'm still not desirable by just the median white male standards, right? That's just what it is, and I don't deny that. I never pretended otherwise. What I'm trying to do is I'm doing like what these Asian women do. What these Asian women do with going to San Francisco. Like, you guys have seen the memes, right? Of these, like, mid-tier, like, cringingly mid-tier Asian women acting like absolute divas in San Francisco because they just have a complete monopoly on these tech nerds because of how massive the male-female imbalance is. And they are getting their pick of the litter. And I also saw this up here. Like, I knew a guy when I was going to Carleton University. There was a guy who was not in the same program as me, but we shared a class. And he was in a different stream of engineering. And and what you noticed at the time, this was in the 2010s, is that a lot of Chinese foids would go to Canadian universities and they would take STEM programs because they knew white girls did not take the STEM programs. Overwhelmingly, they did not. And if they did not stay in the STEM programs. They would wash out. So they would go in there and they would poach like nerdy, shy engineering stream white guys. And they would punch well above their looks. Like this particular guy I knew, his name was Artem. And he got with a Korean foid who was literally a 3 out of 10 in the face. Like, okay, there's a difference between unattractive in the sense of like plain, where they're just not really, there's nothing really inspiring about them. Like you could just look right past them and nothing would draw your eyes to them. And then there's genuinely unpleasant to look at, right? Genuinely unpleasant to look at is what I'm describing when I'm talking about this rice void that he got with. And she got him because she just approached and interacted with him. And he was just a shy kid who no white girl ever gave him the time of day. Because he's a nerdy engineering kid. But in terms of looks, he was like at least 5 out of 10. Like he actually had a decent face and he was about 5'9". So I mean, he was like average, I would say. Actually his face was a little bit above average, I would say. Maybe like 5.5, whatever. Still, she min-maxed her options. And I think anybody should do that. Anybody should do that. They need to figure out how to optimize their situation and get the best that they can with the cards that they do have. White women are more pleasant to interact and date with me than black women. The majority of social demographic is a lower class set of thug maxing. Yeah, I mean, American black women are uniquely bad in that regard. Like, when I would interact with Americans before I sort of became aware of this stuff, I would find their characterization of black women very strange because I was used to interacting with pretty much just first-generation African women straight from Africa, from like West Africa, from East Africa. And they were completely different from how black women were described in America. And I was like, this is almost like a different creature. Like what? Because the black women I was used to interacting with, I mean, they had their own quirks in terms of culture and race, but in terms of personality, they were generally quite pleasant to talk to and interact with. I would say they were quite feminine in their personalities. I would say as far as black women go, the bottleneck was not their personalities. At least if we're talking Africans, definitely not their personalities. But black women in America, it's like, oh God. Like there's nothing. Like they could physically be very attractive. Like they could look like Naomi Campbell, but then they open their mouths and you just hear like shit. Just immediate repulsion, just ugh. So I feel for them. I feel for the brothers. They have a really shit hand to deal with. I'm not hating people for being incels. I'm hating people for blaming white women for everything when by any metric white women mog. White women are the nicest people to be around. Not in my experience. Not in my experience. Dude, of the times that, like, I've had multiple experiences where I was walking down a bike path, okay? And a white woman, and it was always white women. Well, no, there was one exception that wasn't a white woman, but almost always white women. If they heard me behind them, they would turn around, see me, and they would stop. And they would wait for me to pass them and wait until I got at least 10 feet in front of them. Then they would start walking behind me. The implication being that, like, I'm some kind of threat to them. Okay? They would not do this. Like, you see stories all the time out of Europe, for example, of teenage white girls inviting Arab and black migrants into their cars, into apartments. Like, they'll buy alcohol and drugs. They'll go to apartments with these migrants, and they'll get drunk and high and then have sex with them. And then something will happen to them. And then this is where you see all the right-wing remigrationist accounts screaming about rape, screaming about, oh, this is, our women are being assaulted and no one's stopping it. This is horrible. No. If you actually read the fine print, okay, you could say that, okay, for example, there was a recent case in Germany where I think it was like 2 or 3 teenage girls were, like, 2 of them were hospitalized and one of them was not, and they were with a bunch of black kids from West Africa, I believe, and they were accused of, the black guys were accused of rape, sexual assault, and then later it was dropped. And what it sounds like is, they pursued these women into their apartments and then physically attacked them, and then assaulted them so viciously that they were, like, 2 of them were hospitalized. And just because of how anti-white and racist these judges are, they were just let go to terrorize more victims. But then if you actually read the article, which I did, you see these girls bought alcohol, like lots of alcohol. They themselves bought the alcohol, and they connected with these black guys, and they went to an apartment with the alcohol to hang out with them, and they got blank out drunk, and then they had sex with them. And then if you actually look into the details of the hospitalization, it had nothing to do with, like, physical assault. It was to do with overdosing on the alcohol and potentially the drugs. They talked about the alcohol in the article. They didn't talk about the drugs. But they talk about the alcohol. And probably what happened is that they drank so much that they blacked out, and that this was probably what the hospitalization was related to. Okay. And you saw another case. Dude, they went to the apartment and they brought the alcohol. The guys were already in the apartment. Here, I'll find the article for you. There was another one in Australia. 17-year-old girl, migrants forced their way into her car. They sexually assault her for hours, driving her around in her own car, and then they leave the car. And then when you look into the story, this 17-year-old Australian girl let this guy into her car to drive him somewhere. Wait a minute. Now, the problem wasn't the one guy that got into the car. He was like an Arab or something. It was all his buddies that piled into the car. What most likely happened is that he was hollering at this chick, or he was trying to do some, if you know any Arabs, like, they're like giga red-pilled in almost a cringe way. And like, they will try the game stuff and whatever, and they're often obsessed with white women. It's just a fact. And what most likely happened is that this guy was trying game on this chick, or he was trying to, like, get her interested, and I guess the most attractive one, she decided to pick him up and take him somewhere. Probably, well, we can only use our imaginations why. But then the other guys piled in afterwards, and that's when the altercation happened. She opened the door and let him into her car, okay? If it was me, this chick would have seen me as a predator from the beginning. All right? From the beginning, she would have seen me as a predator. This guy, she lets into her car without a hitch. I am right about everything, and this is why I'm rich and he is a loser. Well, aren't the Jews the richest group in the world? Like, don't they have the most wealth? Like, 20% of the billionaires in America are Jewish. So does that mean that they are the most morally righteous group? Like, if we're using the argument of, like, and that's actually, ironically, it's a very American way of thinking. Like, Americans culturally associate wealth with moral value. You know, like, rich people are morally good people on some level. It's not a European way of thinking. But that would explain your ability to engage in this kind of really autistic-driven thinking without being met with reality, right? Because if you have a lot of money, you can offset autismo to some extent. You can either cope a lot more easier because you have access to much better copes than we do. Whereas if we're having to deal with reality as it is, it's quite different. But yeah. Hello, Marsar. First time viewer here. Might I ask what you are thinking of going after loose-maxed women, and also what do you think of Chinese national exfoliating gloves for showering? Yeah, first of all, you're not a first-time viewer. Look, man, if you have a fat fetish, you are actually winning the fucking game. You are winning the game in life because you can thin yourself out as a dude, and you now have access to a niche of women that are generally undesirable by most men. Even if most men might be willing to, if they get desperate enough, they might be willing to go after a fat chick. But for the most part, it's like a niche market. If you genuinely find that sexually attractive, you are actually enviable in a lot of ways. Especially if you're not an American, because that would then give you the ability to not only find a fat chick in America and geomax to America and get with a fat chick, but you'll actually be attracted to her. Like she'll actually be desirable for you. That's pretty badass if you think about it. That's pretty badass. You're winning the game of life in that regard. See, I wish I was like that, but I'm the opposite. Like, I think that that recent photo of AOC is like, that's the fattest that you can get for me and still be attractive, is that AOC photo where she's like dummy thick. If you get fatter than that, at that point, then that's like the plateau, and then it starts going down really fast into just unfuckable territory. We need money to knead. Absolutely we do. And kneading is a lot easier in shall we say, developing countries than it is in rich countries if you are from the first world, right? Like in a lot of these countries, you can live fairly comfortably. Like, you know, for example, Brazil, you can live very comfortably on 2,000 USD a month. Which, you know, if you think about what you could do to generate that income, that's not a bad living at all. It's not a bad living at all. And there's a lot of other countries like that as well. Actually, it's funny because there's a Chinese guy that I met that I'm working with, and he's straight from China. He's straight from Shanghai, actually. And I actually spent like the first week and a half that I knew him basically explaining how, because once he became aware that I was knowledgeable about politics and about China as well, and also, you know, I was willing to talk about these things. I wasn't a normie. He started to ask me questions about Canada, like, effectively, why is Canada so fucked up? Like, he showed up in Toronto as a Chinese guy, and there's Indians and Muslims everywhere. And he's thinking, where are all the Canadians? That's actually what he said to me. It's like, I entered Canada from Toronto, and I was wondering where all the Canadians were. It seems like they're gone, and there's just all these random foreigners from other parts of the world, mostly undesirable parts of the world. And I explained to him what I've talked about in my videos and streams about democracy, like the effect of democracy on the political system, you know. And also I managed to get into, you know, you have to be very careful how you phrase things, right? Because you don't know how far along a random person is when it comes to, even if they're foreign, if they're not from a libtarded country. Like, China is not a libtard country at all. But you just don't know the degree of knowledge that they have about these things. So you have to be careful how you phrased it. But I basically explained that when you live in a democracy, you have, like, women, because they have equal votes to men, they're able to distort the logical process of the state. They're able to distort the state's interests with their influence as voters. Whereas if you look at dictatorships like China, for example, China is the Chinese state, governed by the CCP as an authoritarian state, they understand that their main threat to their control of the country comes from fighting age men as a group. Like that's the group that would be fighting against them for control of the country, and that's also the group that they would be relying on to fight for them, either against an internal enemy or against a foreign enemy, right? So they understand, eventually all these dictatorships, no matter where they begin, even if they begin from a communist point of view, which is what these countries started from. They started from communist viewpoints, and they were especially the Soviet Union was very leftist in terms of its policies at the very beginning of the state. Like they effectively abolished marriage. They made no-fault divorce very easy to get. They liberalized abortion to a very extreme degree. And it resulted in social chaos in the Soviet Union. And eventually, when Stalin took power, he reversed all of that because Stalin was facing a war with Nazi Germany. And he understood that if you want to fight a war, you need to have soldiers willing to fight for you. And you need to give them a stake in the society in order to get that. It doesn't really matter what you do with women, because women are just going to surrender to whoever the powerful group is. Whatever group dominates, it controls the society, they're going to surrender to that group. They're going to align with that group. Men are different. Men can pose a much greater threat, and men are also the means through which you project your power outwards, and also how you maintain your system internally. And so the Soviet Union naturally became more socially conservative and patriarchal. By the 1960s, the Soviet Union was already more socially conservative, much more socially conservative than the United States and Western countries, Western Europe. China as well. I mean, China began by traditional Chinese standards. The Communist Party of China was extremely liberal. Like they imposed strict egalitarianism between men and women. They tried to remove gender distinctions to the greatest extent possible in the beginning under Mao. But then over time, as the leadership evolved and as the ideological radicals got purged after Mao, the Gang of Four, as they were called, they got purged after Mao, and then you had Deng Xiaoping come in, and then you had other leaders that were much more pragmatic. You had the Chinese state gradually evolve into a nationalist, authoritarian, socially conservative state that was patriarchal in its orientation. And to this day, China is they're dealing with the same birth rate problems we are, and they're actually pressuring women. Chinese women are the ones getting pressured in the country, as opposed to men, because they understand women are the bottleneck here. Like, it's women that are deciding not to marry, and Chinese men are much more, if you actually look at polling, Chinese men are more willing and eager to marry than Chinese women. I think it's 75% of Chinese men want to marry versus 50% of Chinese women. And I think Chinese men want to have 2.6 children on average if you poll them, desired fertility, whereas Chinese women, it's 0.8 or something. It's really bad. But the CCP, because they're a rational sovereign state, they don't have to worry about women's votes distorting the political thinking of the state. They're able to act in the state's interest, which means acting against women's interests. Right? That's what's important, anyways. Where are all the Canadians? These are the Canadians. Yes, they are. They are the Canadians. And actually, it's funny, this guy is, after talking to him, and I guess I impressed him with my general knowledge of China, which, by the way, my knowledge of China, when it comes to geography and stuff, for the most part, I didn't even get that from, something prestigious, reading the histories of China or whatever. It was from, it's from, playing Europa Universalis 4 and Victoria 2. That's pretty much where I got my general knowledge about China geographically and historically. I couldn't name any of the empire's leaders or whatever, but I could tell you the Ming Empire, the Tang Empire. Well, I think it went from Tang to Yuan Khanate to Ming to, I only know that again because I played Paradox games. Open this. It's the report of it being bullshit. What's the report of it being bullshit? What are we talking about? When you realize you can triple your body count by cracking fat females but are too prideful and have high self-esteem to do the deed. You know what? Part of this, there's an element that is connected to individual male nature, like because some men are just naturally different from others. I know guys who have gone with fat voids as a strategy because they just weren't getting other things, and because they were manlets for the most part. And they, even though you would think like, oh, well, they just want to, get in and get out, they actually would fall for these voids because they're just naturally wired to be that way. They're kind of like highly social in nature, like EU social, as they say, or pro-social in nature, tend to form attachments to women quite easily and quite authentically, and they end up in the same situation where they get hooked on these women, and these women can just, break their hearts. I've seen that happen, So it's not a strategy where you can just, just because they're fat, you're not going to catch feelings or whatever. That's not really a good way to think about it. But, if you're the type of guy who can just run through chicks and it doesn't bother you at all, then, go for it. And then I just realized the pace AI is going, healthcare jobs more in demand. Imagine the extended lifespan of boomers all the way to 120, 150. I get what you're saying there, Saint. I don't think that's going to happen for boomers. I think that could happen for millennials. I don't think it'll go up to 150. I think maybe we could go to 120. But boomers, I don't think are going to benefit from that. And actually, what's going to be important in the coming decade and perhaps, 10, 20 years, and this is going to set the tone for politics going forward, is you are going to see baby boomers are going to start dying, and they are going to consume all of their assets in medical bills just to last for as long as possible. And all the millennials that are expecting some kind of windfall inheritance, whether they're inheriting a house or they're inheriting savings or whatever, they're going to see that go up in smoke from medical bills. And it's interesting because this is actually something that was, if any of you guys remember back in the Obama days when Obamacare was being debated, a lot of Republicans were screaming about, oh, death panels, death panels, death panels. Okay, the reason why they were talking about death panels is because if you have socialized medicine, in theory, a state actor can choose to ration medical care on the basis of your situation in the society. So, for example, if you're like an 85-year-old and you are at best, and let's say that you're like terminally ill, at best you could last maybe another 2 years with aggressive medical treatment that could cost millions of dollars. Well, the government could step in and just say, we have limited resources, and because we have a socialized system, we're going to prioritize healthcare to someone else rather than extend this boomer's lifespan another 2 years pointlessly. And this is what death panels meant, because what the Republicans wanted at that time was they wanted boomers to be able to consume all of their resources privately just to be able to survive for as long as possible. Like it was, typical Republicans. It's the pro-capitalist, pro-market consumption, anti-social model, right? Because really, you should have a limit Okay, like you shouldn't be able to consume all of your resources just to live for as long as possible and deny the next generation any of your assets just because you want to use them you want to consume them all just to survive another 3 or 4 years. And obviously the Republicans won that one because Obamacare, as it became a thing, was just basically, it's like what car insurance is, right? I'm pretty sure you have to have health insurance, or you get like a fine or something. Like that's all it was. It was actually worse than having a fully privatized system or a fully socialized system. It was like the worst of both worlds. And yeah, because that's the system that's in place, you're going to see a lot of boomers just burn up their assets, drain their assets, just to live for as long as possible. And you're going to see an entire generation of millennials that will not have any inheritance coming forward. And that is going to inform the politics of these millennials. Like, we're already seeing it. And I remember I was talking about it as far back as my second Copium den. If you guys remember, this is when Mamdani was elected. I said this is like class warfare is going to become the template for American politics, because there's really nothing else in America. Like the only thing that motivates Americans to do things at scale is material wealth, materialism. It's either you're looting someone else or you yourself are being looted and you're trying to prevent that. Like that's really what animates Americans. It's not race. It's not culture. It's not nationalism. It's nothing like that. You know, it's just purely resources. And therefore, because of what's happening to the American population, as I was saying at the beginning of the stream, you're seeing it separate. You're seeing the American elite economy separate from the American nation. And almost the American nation is almost being treated as an externality by the business class. The same way that you would treat like dumping toxic wastes into a river somewhere. Where if you're a business, you're not responsible legally, like this is before environmental laws, right? You're not responsible legally for this river. You could just dump as much shit into it, and that's an externality. That's not a cost that's borne by you, so there's no reason to even care what happens to the river, right? Well, this is effectively what the American nation is becoming, right? It's becoming an externality to its business class, where Americans exist to consume, like Americans exist to spend money in America, US dollars, on foreign imports that allows a net outflow of US dollars into the global economy to serve the needs of the expanding global economy, because the entire world uses US dollars as a medium of exchange. And as a result, you need a perpetual net outflow of U.S. dollars into the global economy. That's all Americans are good for, according to the system that's in place. Like you can scrape some of the academic elites off the top, and put them into the elite economy. You can do that, or into the business, finance, tech, that sort of thing. But the vast majority of them, you just don't need to care what happens to them one way or another, right? And, whatever, like, if the Americans can't compete with the entire rest of the world for American jobs, then they just lose out. Who cares, right? Neither the Republicans or the Democrats have an answer to this, right? Because the Democrats are ideologically committed to immigration, and the Republicans are committed to the business class. That's who primarily finances them, right? I mean, it finances both sides, but the Republicans are just nakedly controlled by them and also the radical Zionists, right? And another thing I wanted to talk about, actually, was the effect America has had on the rest of the world. And going forward, like, if we assume that no big changes to the world happen, like there's no kind of revolutions that happen in, say, European countries, which maybe it will happen. Like maybe the Europeans will they will find a way to take back Europe or whatever and do mass remigration, and the day is saved. But if we assume that's not going to happen, where are things ending up, right? And the general trajectory that most right-wingers describe is Brazilification. And this is interesting because having done a lot of research into Latin America now and trying to understand how this region works politically, and socially, culturally, racially, how it works, Brazilification would actually be the best outcome that could possibly happen. And in reality, it's most likely not going to work out that way. Like, it will work out that way in terms of the racial composition of the country, or countries, I should say. But in terms of every other aspect of the society, it's not going to be that way. Like the difference, if you look at a country like Brazil, even though it's racially quite heterogeneous, it is culturally unified. And that's because they had several centuries of Portuguese domination. And overwhelmingly, the Portuguese racial admixture into the population, which is the dominant component in Brazilians genetically, including like brown and black Brazilians. Portuguese is the dominant component. I think even black Brazilians they're more like mulattoes than blacks as we would imagine them in the U.S., for example. But the Portuguese are dominant, and they're overwhelmingly men. Like pretty much the entire population, regardless of their racial composition, they're descended from Portuguese men or other European men. And culturally, they're unified. There is no Afro-Brazilian culture that's really distinct from Brazil, like mainstream Brazilian culture. Like they're all part of the same cultural continuum. In a country like France, that would never happen. Right, like the French might mix themselves into a multiracial population with on a gradient from French to North African and Sub-Saharan African. That might happen, but culturally speaking, if anything, you see the opposite. You see the men from these foreign backgrounds mixing with the women from French backgrounds to a much greater extent than the reverse. Now, maybe I'm wrong about that. It's rather difficult to get this data out of France because they refuse to collect demographic data. And I think I've talked about it before in previous streams where there's actually a certain kind of advantage to that in the sense that they don't have a DEI regime established that redistributes resources in a spoils system way because they don't have they don't collect the demographic data that would allow for that. But it also results in not really knowing what exactly is going on the ground level. It's hard to figure out what the genetic composition of the population is now. But the general impression is, and this is also true with Muslims in general, right? Because Muslims aggressively police their women, is that overwhelmingly the mixing is going to be with the local women and foreign men. And this emasculates the culture in a way. From the French side, it emasculates the French men to the extent that there's no, actually being part of that culture as a man is emasculating. Because why would you, if this culture exists so that you can fuck their women, why would you feel any kind of masculine pride in identifying with them? Right? It's a concept I call patria. It's something I've been thinking about. Where there is, it's the relationship between your own paternal lineage that you draw your sense of masculine pride from in yourself and your, I guess you could say, your people or your heritage, versus the culture that you exist in. And if the culture you exist in is hostile to your own patria, your own paternal identity, this is going to alter how you interact in the society. And I think most European countries, the patria of those countries has just been destroyed. Like they don't have, like the men of those countries are just emasculated by the state, by the culture as a rule. Like it's funny because if you look at even the right wingers, you'll see them say like effectively, we cannot allow them to assimilate. They don't assimilate. They only marry their own women. And like I've seen French and English right wingers say this about Muslims, for example, and I'm like, are you saying like they need to fuck our women before we can accept them as one of us? Why would anybody want to be part of that culture? Like, why would anybody want to be connected to that or to identify with that as a man? Like, it's a completely emasculated identity, you know? And I think this also can explain to some extent, because it's interesting that I remember when I was a teenager, I read the book Descent of Man by Charles Darwin. And I found it interesting how he would describe, and of course this was the 19th century racial thinking, right? Is he would talk about how the in the lands that the Europeans have set foot in and colonized, the indigenous man just like withers away into decline. Like they just sort of decline as a group and disappear, and like they become despondent. And he interpreted it as like when the superior race emerges and asserts itself in this sphere, nature takes its course, and the inferior race naturally gives way and dissolves into or disappears into out of existence. Like that was effectively what he was arguing. It's a very typical attitude that the 19th century Darwinian thinkers had, which of course this was written by Darwin himself. Right, this was just the attitude that they had. But I think in reality it was because in every colonial possession that had Europeans settling in it in large numbers, the consequence was a widespread emasculation of the dominated groups of men. And this emasculation is actually what led the men to become despondent and demoralized and just sort of dissolve into nothingness. And just like the only strategy as a man, if you're in a culture that emasculates your identity, not just you as an individual, but it emasculates your patria, your paternal lineage, your legacy. It makes it so that your women are able to defect easily, and it glorifies your women defecting from you, and it prevents you from interfering in that process, like that, and that's designed to emasculate and demoralize you. Or maybe that's not necessarily, maybe that's not even the direct intention, but that is the consequence of it. Okay. When that happens, the only response that you can have as a man to preserve your self-respect and your self-esteem is to detach from your patria and just become an individualistic person. And I think this is what you see with a lot of Europeans, just instinctively. They stop thinking of themselves as connected to this patriarchal identity, you know, and instead they become just these individualists. They're only concerned about their own individual experiences, and they become these sort of atomized, alienated people, but this preserves their personal pride by severing it from the collective esteem of their male lineage in their society. Whereas if you compare that to, for example, Pakistanis, they like the concept of honor in their culture is a collective concept. It's not an individual concept, you know? Well, I mean, maybe there's an individual element to it as well, but honor, as they understand it, it's like if you're a woman and you consort with a foreign race of men, you are besmirching the honor. You are wounding the honor of your community, which is effectively your men. You are wounding the honor of your men, and you are insulting the honor of your men, and you will be punished for it, right? And as a result, they are actually very prideful of their identity. And you don't really see it so much in Pakistan because they don't have to deal with migrants the way that we do. But a good example of this, I think, as well, is in Turkey with Turks. Now, Turks are not, they're not like Pakistanis. They're not that clannish and that, I guess we could say, primitive in their, or maybe I don't know if primitive is the right word. They just don't have that mindset. They're much more modern in their mindset. They're closer to Europe, but they're not like Europeans yet. Like, there is still a strong sense of nationalism and presumptive patriarchy. Like, Turkey is, on paper, Turkey looks a lot like a Western secular country, but in terms of just the passive cultural norms and values, it is still very patriarchal. A good example of this would be, in Turkey, Turkish women are not allowed to be prostitutes in Turkey. Non-Turkish women are allowed to be prostitutes. They are legally permitted to be prostitutes. Turkish women cannot be. And this, to me, would be a good example of a indirectly patriarchal norm. Because the whole idea is we're going to preserve the honor of Turkish women, that we're not going to allow them to whore themselves out for money. But foreign women, it doesn't matter. And we will allow men to take advantage of these women insofar as, they want to, right? And in Turkey, there was a Syrian migrant that sexually assaulted a Turkish girl. I think it was I don't know if it was in Istanbul or Ankara. It was one of the biggest cities, right? Obviously, Istanbul's number one. Ankara, Edirne. It wasn't Edirne. I think it was Istanbul or Ankara. And immediately after that happened, in the city that it happened in, all of the Syrian-owned houses, like apartments, buildings, stores, they all got burned down. Like, the Turks went ape on them, just went ape shit on them, and burned their shit down. And that's the kind of violent reaction that you get when you have this collective patria that's strong. That and you can feel like when there's a collective insult like this that you respond violently. Whereas in Europe, it's more or less the opposite. Like, European men just sort of don't really care. Like, sure, nationalists might make some noise about it here and there, but in practice, like, none of us feel. Now, I know I'm not technically a European, right? I'm in Canada, but this is my heritage, right? So when I look at the UK and what's happening there, like, I'm seeing what I see as my own people in terms of ethnicity, even if I wasn't born there. But, like, when I see these things happening to these girls, and then I look in, like, most of the time when you actually, like, look into the stories and you see what happened, it'll be a case of, like, a girl who voluntarily got associated with this guy and then something happens to her. And I think, well, this is, like, this woman is behaving in a way that is emasculating the honor of my men in a way. Like, if I'm thinking like a Pakistani, for example, in no way would I find this, like, I don't feel any responsibility for this girl. Like, I don't consider her as part of my people in that way. I'm just kind of indifferent to it because, like, I've sort of, again, this is how I described about the individualism as a reaction to the emasculation of your patria, is that I've surrendered that sense of being connected paternally with the English. Now, well, technically I'm not paternally connected with the English. My father's side is French, but my father's side is Frankish French. Like, my Y DNA has hotspots in Germany, Denmark, and England with the Anglo-Saxons because it's Germanic Y DNA. So, I mean, in that sense, I am pretty closely connected to them, right? I am, like, my paternal lineage is Germanic, but regardless. And my surname is of Norman origin, but... So I do feel an affinity to the English in that way. And because I grew up speaking English, I didn't speak French. That was just pretty much my identity. But, like, this... Like, seeing how the English are, like, if you look at downtown London, you'll see, like, all these English girls with these mixed race kids that they're pushing around. And, like, that... like, what Henry Novak, if you look at his... What is the famous photos of him and his sister and his sister's child who's mulatto, right, mixed race. Okay, how am I supposed to feel any attachment to these people? It's like an emasculated male identity, you know. I don't feel any pride being wounded because I don't feel any pride in being part of these men, because these men are just so emasculated as a group. As a group, they're just so emasculated. So it's no wonder, you know. Whereas if you look at the guy who stabbed him, Vikram, whatever his name was, in his community, if the girls were to pull something like that off, they would get expelled from the community. They would lose all contact with their family, you know. Whereas for us, if we say naughty, like if you guys remember that, there was this guy and his wife. They were both white, and they were walking down the street, and he said some rude thing about blacks. He used the N-word, I believe. And the woman actually stopped him and dragged him over to the group of black men and said, "My husband said this to about you. He needs to apologize to you right away." And she turns to her husband and demands that he apologize to them. Like, this is such a humiliated, emasculated people. You know, the women obviously don't respect them, right? The men, how can you respect, like, if you know that your women can treat you in that kind of way, why would you feel any kind of masculine pride in being part of that identity, right? And white Americans are sort of the same way, I think, because white Americans, there was never really an explicitly white-dominated society in the North. And when I say explicitly, I mean legally, you didn't see, like, the state and the culture identify itself as white and dominating the society. You did see that in the South. In the South, there was like an explicit white dominance of Jim Crow, right? Pre-civil rights. So as a result, when civil rights happened and then it spread into the North and the culture began to shift from the whites to the blacks in terms of bringing blacks into the center of the culture, moving whites out of the center and into the opposition that blacks used to be in. You see the self-esteem of blacks rise and the self-esteem of whites fall. And I think whites are in the same position now where the masculine identity or the patria of white men in America has been destroyed. And they're emasculated on a cultural level, on like a symbolic level. They're emasculated. And as a consequence, it's the same thing. Like when you see like some story of a white chick who got with a black guy, and then she ends up with her head blown off or whatever, everybody just laughs at it. Like there's no outrage, right? Because what was the like? And if you compare that to Jim Crow, when like there would be a black kid would whistle at a white girl and then he'd get strung up. Like it was extreme in the other direction. They were extremely jealous towards white women. Well, and they were very protective of white women as well. Like on a white woman's word, whether she lied or not, a black man could be strung up, right, and lynched. But the common denominator there was race mixing was legally prohibited. It was a crime to race mix in the Jim Crow South. And this was, in effect, a thing that protected white domination, white masculine domination of the society. And once that was eliminated, and then you started to see the culture invert and turn hostile towards whites, you see this dynamic invert, where black men were treated in a very negative way, like this is just obvious, right? Like white men could, now, I don't think that white men could do whatever they wanted to black women and get away with it, but they could certainly get away with a lot more than black men could get away with white women, and probably black men could get away with black women back during the Jim Crow period, right? Like it was very much openly preferential towards white men, the Jim Crow South. And this affected black men's perception of themselves. Like even back then, you would hear about, for example, paper bag parties, where in order to attend this party, you had to have a skin tone that was the same as a paper bag, which is like a light brown color, or lighter than that, right? Like it was really a Eurocentric and anti-black cultural identity. And then once that got inverted, you start seeing the opposite, right? You start seeing like white men, if they think that they can access an identity that is prideful in a masculine way, this is where you see all the wiggers come in, right? Where you see like white guys LARPing as black guys, right? Because it's a masculine identity, right? It's an identity that you can have pride in because the culture privileges you in some ways. But as a result, you now have white men refusing to defend themselves, you know? Whereas if you compare that to Hispanic culture is almost a completely segregated from mainstream culture. Like if you look at these Spanish-speaking barrios where they've swamped and displaced demographically the American population so much that they've created their own quasi-independent colonies in America. They're still operating with a Latin American style of patria. They do still have that strong sense of identity, of like masculine pride that draws them towards defending their communities, for example. And so, like when the BLM riots happened, when they tried to get into Mexican barrios, they were fired at with rifles. They were threatened with violence, right? The men got together and told them, you know, you try this in our community, we're going to fucking kill you. And they stayed the hell out of Mexican neighborhoods during the BLM riots. What did the whites do? The whites just ran away and fled, right? Or they went to the police, or there was a few cases where individuals had their houses basically being besieged, and they would have a standoff as individuals with the entire mob, right? But there was no white collective activity, right? That's the big difference. But yeah, all white voids have a fake, you-know-what story. It kind of reminds me of that X meme of the women that were surprise snuggled, and when they were asked to block their surprise snuggler, they came up with some weird excuse to not do so. It was very strange. Like, they're willing to block inkies on immediate identification, but the ones that surprise snuggle them, they have a much harder time blocking them. It's very strange. Second generation Hispanic women tend to lean left and appease all the woke shit, and Hispanic men just follow along. Yeah, I mean, this isn't necessarily a permanent... Whoopsie daisy. This isn't necessarily a permanent state of affairs, right? You do see this as well with European ethnic communities, right? Like Italians and Central Eastern Europeans that migrated in the over the course of the 20th century, that migrated into America. They had a similar sort of ethos where they had their own ethnically distinct communities and kept to themselves, and also policed their women as well. And actually, it's funny because my father used to tell me that in the 50s, when he was young, like he was a young teen, because he was born in 41, he used to, like, the Italian men that were migrating from Italy to Canada in the 50s, they would get into these huge fights with the local men. And that's because they would harass the women. They would, like, grope and, be lewd and... like the kind of stuff that we hear coming out of migrants today. Like that's what my father would talk about back in the 50s. And it used to trigger these huge street fights between the locals and the Italian immigrants that had just come in. And it's interesting how it's kind of like the same dynamic as what you see with the migrants that have come in from conservative patriarchal cultures where the women do have controls on their behavior. They have controls, most importantly, on defection. They cannot defect. Or at least it's very difficult for them to defect from their communities, right? And it's not like Pakistan where they're going to throw acid in their faces or whatever. But like if you're a second gen Italian woman in an Italian community in the Bronx or in Canada as well, or in Toronto, let's say, and it's the 1970s, you're probably going to find an Italian guy because your parents would just not approve of you marrying a non-Italian. And the risk would be that you alienate your family. And women are very integrated into their families and communities, or they were at that time. And so that was actually a much more credible threat, is being alienated from their communities. So as a result, it was a way to keep women from defecting. And it worked quite effectively. But nowadays Italians are no different really than the rest of us. As a matter of fact, they're really kind of like Italians in Canada or largely in Toronto right now. I forget exactly what part of Toronto. I know that the Chinese are in North York. I'm not sure. I know that the Italians are close to them, but I forget exactly where. But they are dealing with a lot of their women mixing out because, and you hear this in general from, like, I know guys in Toronto and they talk about how, I mean, it's not just the women, it's also the men too. It's not just the women, I will say that. But like there's not really, like, you don't see any kind of like racial loyalty or whatever. Now these girls are like third, maybe fourth generation Italians, right? And they might be mixed with the local Europeans as well. But you see this modification, and like you'll find a lot of Italian girls that they'll date like any race of man, and so they're actually dealing with the same shit that we are. The only difference between the Italians in Toronto and say Anglos in the smaller cities further north is the exposure to the foreign population. Toronto is minority white. I think it's like 30% white. And what you're seeing in Toronto now, the proportions of mixing out by men and women, so it's not just women, men and women, that's what you see when whites are a minority. This meme about white women being the most loyal race of women, that only exists because you're looking at populations where whites are the super majority. And therefore, just out of chance, the vast majority of in-person interactions that white women have are with white men. And so just out of probability, they're most likely going to form relationships with white men. As soon as that proportion goes down to minority status, you see the rate of mixing rise proportionally upwards, right? And it will keep going up. Like you're seeing currently, I think in California, it's like 25. It's actually, and this is the CDC Wonder Tool, is a beautiful tool for this. There's a higher percentage of white, non-Hispanic whites race mixing. I think it's like 25% in California than Hispanics as a proportion of their population. I think it's like 18% with Hispanics and 25% with whites, or something along those lines. And that's simply because there are more Hispanics than whites, and it's the same effect. Most Hispanics, they're going to interact with other Hispanics just due to probability, and therefore they form relationships with Hispanics. As soon as whites are interacting with non-whites at a larger and larger degree, you see the mixing increase proportionally, right? Like this isn't like an instinctive loyalty thing. We just have to be honest. I got $3 from the English Times. Thank you very much. Let me actually see if there's a message attached to that. Keep up the good work. Thank you very much, English. Greatly appreciate that. And I just noticed that I have a huge backlog of messages in Discord. So I think my guess is I'm going to have a long debate with Tails, which I would greatly enjoy, actually. Because Tails, I think you would find that we disagree on fewer things than you think we do. Right? But women are doing everything right by avoiding you. Yes, that is true. They are. Have you ever read the diaries of actual rape victims? Most of them committed suicide or stopped speaking. It's absolutely horrific. Well, then they gotta start blocking their rapists. Like, come on, guys, or come on, girls. You gotta stop. You gotta at least block them. Okay, I think that's a fair expectation. But apparently, that's just too much to ask. Okay. Anyways, I'm gonna start turning down the stream now. You know, since we've hit the 2-hour mark. Greatly appreciate you guys showing up and interacting. It was nice that I could talk a bit about America, because it is an important country. And actually, I've had this conversation like 4 times by now in my Discord. But because of the... it's not being streamed live, right? Because we have to be very careful what we say when we're streaming live. I hadn't had a chance to really talk too much about it on stream. So... anyways, guys, thank you for coming along with this stream. It was a great conversation.